The Girl with a Guitar. The morning sun spilled gently across the small town of Wyomissing, Pennsylvania, where quiet streets whispered dreams only a few dare to chase. Inside a modest two-story house, a 10-year-old girl sat cross-legged on the bedroom floor, scribbling furiously into a worn leather-bound diary. Her name was Taylor, and her words weren't just thoughts. They were lyrics, aching to be heard. She was different, and she knew it. While other kids her age played tag or gossiped about pop stars, Taylor was lost in melodies only she could hear. Her classmates didn't understand her quiet voice or why she spent lunch breaks jotting rhymes instead of laughing in groups. They whispered behind her back. Some laughed at her face. But Taylor never stopped writing. Her sanctuary was a dusty attic filled with old books, forgotten furniture, and in one corner, a wooden guitar case. It had belonged to her grandmother, who had passed away the year before. One rainy afternoon, her father brought it down, wiped the dust off, and placed it in her lap. She always believed music skipped a generation, he said with a smile. Maybe it landed on you. The strings felt foreign under her small fingers, but something about the instrument felt familiar. She didn't know how to play it, not yet, but when she strummed that first trembling chord, it lit something inside her. Days turned into weeks. Taylor practiced until her fingertips bled, mimicking chords from a book borrowed from the library. Her world shrank to school songs and six strings. Her mother began driving her to open mic nights at nearby cafes. Even though Taylor was often the youngest performer by a decade, the first time she stood under the spotlight, her knees locked. The crowd was small, distracted, clinking coffee cups and scrolling phones. Her voice quivered on the first line. She forgot a lyric in the middle. But when she sang the final note, pure, cracked, but honest, something changed. One woman clapped slowly, then another. By the time Taylor stepped off stage, applause filled the room. Later that night, sitting by her window with a guitar on her lap and moonlight pooling around her, Taylor opened her diary again. She wrote only one line. Someday they'll sing my songs too. That was the night she stopped waiting for the world to listen. She would make them hear. The road to Nashville. Taylor's world was no longer confined to the quiet streets of Wyomissing. The walls of her room, once her only audience, felt suffocating. There was no room for her dreams here, not when the whispers of small-town girl echoed in her mind. It wasn't enough to sing in dimly lit cafes or play for her family in the living room. She needed more. She needed Nashville. Her parents, though reluctant, understood the weight of her words when she said, "I have to go. If I stay here, I'll never know what could have been." The decision wasn't easy. The move would uproot their lives, their stable jobs, their familiarity. But they saw the fire in Taylor's eyes, the same fire her grandmother had once spoken of. So they packed up, left behind their old life, and moved to the heart of country music. Nashville was not the dreamland she had envisioned. The streets were paved with ambition, but every corner was also crowded with rejection. Taylor's first days were filled with late nights spent performing in smoky bars and coffee houses, hoping someone would notice the girl with the guitar. But no one did. Each audition was a door slammed in her face. "You're too young," they said. "We need someone with more experience." Or, "Your sound isn't quite what we're looking for." The hours of practice, the songs written from the deepest parts of her heart, were reduced to nothing more than polite nods and fake smiles. It wasn't long before doubt crept in. Was she really good enough? Or was she just a small-town dreamer too stubborn to see reality? There were nights she cried in the silence of her bedroom, her guitar resting against the wall untouched. But then came a glimmer of hope. One evening, after another disappointing performance, Taylor was ready to pack it all in. The thought of leaving crossed her mind, just for a moment. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. A record executive, walking through the coffee house to meet a friend, heard her voice. Not the polished, rehearsed version she had perfected for the stage, but the raw, unguarded sound that came when Taylor wasn't trying to impress. It was real. It was her. "You're different," he said, his voice calm but intent. "You're not what the industry's looking for, but maybe that's why you'll stand out." That was the moment. No longer was she just a small-town girl with a guitar. She was Taylor Swift, and her story was just beginning. The spotlight and the storm. Taylor's rise to fame was swift, the kind of story written for tabloids and TV specials. By 18, she had already achieved more than most artists did in a lifetime. Platinum albums, #1 hits, and awards that adorned her walls like trophies from a game she hadn't even realized she was playing. But beneath the glittering surface, a storm was brewing. The world was watching. Fans cheered, but the pressure to stay perfect, to remain a shining example, began to suffocate her. It wasn't just the long tours, the sleepless nights, or the relentless schedule. It was a constant invasion of her personal life, her relationships, her every move scrutinized. Critics and paparazzi turned every step she took into a headline. The girl who had once written songs from her bedroom now felt like a character in a story someone else was telling. The media, at first, adored her. The fresh-faced country singer who had crossed over into pop, the sweetheart who charmed her way into everyone's hearts. But the moment she stepped out of line, the love turned to venom. Her relationships, once private, were plastered across magazine covers. Who's she dating now, they asked. Is she breaking hearts again? The narrative spun by the press twisted her words, misrepresented her actions, and turned her into something she wasn't. And the worst part? She couldn't escape it. Everywhere she went, she was followed, photographed, dissected. In the midst of it all, Taylor began to lose herself. The girl who had once written for the sheer joy of it, who had poured her heart into every lyric, now found herself writing out of expectation. Each song had to be a hit. Each album had to outdo the last. She wasn't making music anymore. She was trying to survive the storm of her own making. The toll was devastating. Insomnia became her constant companion. Anxiety crept into every moment, every decision. She was no longer the girl with a guitar. She was a machine, churning out hits, constantly performing, always smiling for the cameras. There were nights when she sat alone in her dressing room, staring at the mirror, questioning who she had become. She had achieved everything she had dreamed of, but at what cost? Fame had become a double-edged sword. It gave her everything but took away what was most precious, her sense of self. One night, after a sold-out stadium show, she found herself staring out the window of her hotel room. The city lights blurred in her tears. "Who am I?" she whispered to the empty room. The applause still echoed in her ears, but it felt hollow. But as the storm raged on, something inside Taylor began to change. She couldn't go on like this. She had to find a way to take back control over her music, her life, and most importantly, herself. The comeback queen. Taylor disappeared from the public eye for what felt like an eternity, but in truth, it was just a few months. She needed to step away, not just from the spotlight, but from herself. The girl who had once believed in the power of her music to heal was now trapped by it. She had become a product, not an artist, and that realization hit harder than any criticism. In the quiet of her home, far from the flashing cameras and constant expectations, Taylor rediscovered what had first drawn her to music, the joy of creation. She spent hours each day sitting in her studio, playing the piano, writing in her diary, and allowing the music to come from her soul once again. No longer did she write for the charts or for fame. She wrote for herself, for the peace she had lost. The breakthrough came with the release of Lover, an album that felt like a warm embrace after the cold isolation of her past. It was intimate, vulnerable, and full of love for herself, for the world, for the beauty of life. The songs were reflections of the woman she had become. No longer the perfect image crafted by the media, but a real person, full of contradictions and beauty. But it wasn't just her music that was changing. Taylor had learned to take back control of her story. She fought to own her masters, to redefine how the world saw her, not as a commodity, but as an artist with a voice that mattered. She no longer hid behind the perfect image crafted by the press. She owned her flaws, her mistakes, and her growth. The world watched as she released Folklore and Evermore, albums that felt like a departure from her pop roots, but a return to her true self. These were stories, not just songs, rich with imagery and deep emotion. The Taylor who had once been known for heartbreak ballads and catchy hooks now wrote timeless tales that transcended genre, full of wisdom and reflection. The more she poured herself into her music, the more she healed. She was no longer the girl who had chased fame. She was a woman who had found her voice in the chaos. And it was that voice, honest, unapologetic, and raw, that the world finally began to hear. As Taylor performed once again, this time under her own terms, she saw the faces in the crowd light up, not because they were following the latest trend, but because they understood. Her music wasn't just hers anymore. It was theirs, too. And there, in the glow of the stage lights, Taylor finally understood something she hadn't before. The journey wasn't about finding perfection. It was about finding herself. The girl who had once dreamed of being heard was now telling her own story, and in doing so, gave others the courage to tell theirs.